lot, Michael. It's great to be back in Eugene, and especially for this event. It's great to see so many people who share my passion for community and democracy. And it's wonderful to see people from all walks of life, from public officials to staff to neighborhood leaders, because that's what it takes to make the change that we need. So I wanted to start off just talking about why I'm so passionate about community. See the pictures over here. But I think there's absolutely no substitute for community when it comes to the things we care most deeply about. There's a role for government, there's a role for nonprofit organizations, but there's no substitute for community when it comes to caring for the earth, crime prevention, caring for one another, social justice. We all know that any major changes come from the bottom up, never from the top down. Our democracy, emergency response, and our health and welfare and our very happiness are dependent on community. There's no way government can provide those for us or nonprofits. It's up to community. I want to share a couple stories to illustrate the power of community. The first is from our Ballard neighborhood. Ballard was a neighborhood in Seattle with the least number of street trees. It also had the least number of parks of any other neighborhood outside of downtown. And there was a woman in Ballard named Dervilla Gowan who cared passionately about trees. She wanted to see trees up and down the streets of Ballard. So she applied to our Neighborhood Matching Fund, which is a fund to support community self-help projects. I think you have a similar program here in Eugene. And she did outreach. She put notices in the church bulletin. She put them in the corner grocery store. She put them in the Ballard News Tribune to advertise for other people who shared her passion for street trees. She tried to find somebody at every block in Ballard. If she couldn't find somebody in that block, she would go to that block. She'd knock on every door until she convinced somebody that they shared her passion for street trees. She got that person to sign a pledge form saying, I'll come to a training about how to plant and take care of the trees, and I'll recruit my neighbors to do the same thing. So she turned in all of her pledge forms with her matching fund application, and one day, trucks pulled into her neighborhood with 1,080 trees. Dervilla went, knocked on the door, block captain said, the trees are here. Block captain knocked on the neighbor's doors. That day, over 1,000 people came out, planted trees up and down the streets. People felt incredibly empowered. Look what we can do when we work together as a community. They said, well, this is fantastic, but we still have the least number of parks of any neighborhood in Seattle. So they walked around the neighborhood looking for potential park sites. Had a hard time finding them because the neighborhood is pretty developed. But they found this old house that used to serve as a nursery right next to the business district. It was abandoned now. The property was overgrown. Big public safety problem. So the neighbors organized, they persuaded the city to buy the property for a park. The city had some money to buy the property, but absolutely no money to design or build the park. So the neighbors did it themselves. Local landscape architect volunteered their services and worked with the neighbors to build Baker Park, all built with volunteers. This is some of the landscaping. There were some beautiful old trees in this park. One of those was one of those monkey puzzle trees with the weird limbs. It had died. They're trying to figure out how to remove it. And then one of the neighbors, who was Native American, had a better idea, carved it in place as a totem. And here's some of the detail. Bear with a frog in his mouth. Kind of a symbol of returning nature to the city. Well, this group went on and built a community garden the next year. This is now one of 85 organic community gardens we have in the city of Seattle, all built by volunteers, 7,000 urban gardeners. Collectively, they donate 10 tons of organic produce to our food banks every year. And this is their most recent park. This is the site of a former house. So to commemorate the house, they built all the furniture out of cement. And at the dedication, they unveiled a timeline that shows the 20 parks they built over the past 20 years. Every one of them with volunteers. They restored a salmon estuary. They built ball fields. They built playgrounds. They worked with the kids to build a skate park. 20 parks in 20 years. They said, well, this is great. We've made our neighborhood a much better place, but we're concerned about what's happening to the planet. So they formed an all-volunteer group called Sustainable Ballard. And the big event they have each year is the Sustainable Ballard Fest, where they have music and they have food, and they've got booths to educate people about what they can do to reduce their carbon footprint. I'm speaking at it again tomorrow. And the first booth you go to is the undriver's license station, where you go and you check all the ways you won't drive over the next month, and then you get a laminated undriver's license. It looks pretty cool. It just looks like my official Washington State driver's license. Julia Fields, the one who organized this, she says, I'm going to walk, I'm going to bike, I'm going to take transit, etc., etc. And when you get your driver's license, it entitles you to drive the shuttle bus. It's a foot power mobile. It's going down the street. It's kind of a Fred Flintstone mobile, and gets everybody's attention. It gets people thinking, what could I do to get out of my car? What could I do to reduce my carbon footprint? It's now created a movement. All the neighborhoods around Ballard have organized their own sustainability groups. All the suburban communities around Seattle have done the same. We now have 67 of these organizations, and collectively they call themselves SCALLOPs, Sustainable Communities All Over Puget Sound. And it all started through Villa Gowan and those street trees 20 years ago. Incredible, untapped potential in our communities. It's the only way we're going to save the planet. It's not going to happen just through creating more green technology. People actually have to adopt it. And it's when we're in community, when we feel some sense of connection to each other and the places we share, we feel some sense of accountability, some sense of responsibility, some sense that our actions are going to make a difference, that we're going to take care of our planet. A second unique power of community is the power to prevent crime. It's great to see some police officers here today. Even if we had a police officer in every block in our neighborhood, we probably wouldn't feel as safe, and it certainly wouldn't be as appropriate as neighbors watching out for each other. This is a story from Limerick. Limerick has 4 social housing. Limerick doesn't have a great reputation in the first place after Angela's ashes. But it has 4 social housing communities that are particularly having a hard time. These communities are having a gigantic gang issue where people are feeling very unsafe. There have been many murders in these communities. One in particular, Ballinacora Weston, has had numerous murders, including small kids being killed. The government solution was, we're going to tear down this housing and rebuild it. Didn't consult the residents at all. But 1 unit at a time, they started buying up this housing. And it became boarded up. It became covered with graffiti. Over time, garbage started accumulating in the yards. And with the collapse of the economy in Ireland, there's now absolutely no money carried through on the plan. So they're worse off than ever. Over half the housing is abandoned and boarded up. People are more afraid than ever to come out of their homes. But on Christmas Eve, a 14-year-old girl named Maeve organized her friends, and they went around, house to house, Christmas caroling. Incredible bravery. And it gave everybody else the confidence to start coming out of their homes. And the elders came out and started working with the kids to build flower boxes in front of people's homes to show a sign of ownership and pride. Now they're going through, despite the opposition from government, to rebuild those houses and to renovate them and start to live in them again. But again, there's no substitute for community when it comes to public safety. The problem is, at the very time when we most need community, it's in its greatest state of crisis. How many of you are familiar with Robert Putnam's work? He wrote a book called Bowling Alone, Professor at Harvard. Okay. But he cited a number of, he talked about how when Alexis de Tocqueville came from France and came to North America in 1832, he was blown away. He'd never seen anything like it, the associational life. The way people work together to do collectively what they couldn't do individually. Barn raising parties, volunteer fire departments, town meetings. But he tracks over the past 50 years an incredible breakdown of community life in North America. How fewer and fewer people are belonging to traditional associations, fewer and fewer people voting, fewer families eating together. It's a pretty depressing book for those of us who care so deeply about community. There's a lot of reasons why it's happening. It used to be we live, learn, work, and play all in the same place. And now we've created single-purpose places where we have bedroom communities where we just go to sleep. And malls where we drive a half hour to shop. And we may commute an hour to work. In many ways, we have many different communities, but in a sense, no community at all because our lives are so disjointed and we don't bump into the same people over and over and over again. And it used to be generation after generation we lived in the same village. And how many people here have moved more than 5 times over the course of their lives? And when we're always on the move, it's hard to build those relationships. And if we know we're just going to move again, why bother? It's a lot of work. People working longer and longer days. Many studies are showing fear in some neighborhoods is the #1 thing breaking down community, where people are afraid to come out of their homes, like they were in Ballinacora Weston. Robert Putnam says the #1 thing breaking down community is television. People say they don't have time for community, and yet they spend an average of several hours a day in front of the television. He wrote this book a few years ago. So I think now he would add Facebook, he'd add video games. Increased consumerism, where people are chasing material things rather than relationships and finding value in relationships with one another. Increasing specialization, where we're separating the young people from the old people, from the people with disabilities, totally breaking down community. Organizing people the way that the agencies are organized, rather than the way our communities have been organized historically. And increasing professionalization, where we have institutions doing what communities used to do for themselves. One of the best illustrations of this is from the Ballard neighborhood again. This is a house that was owned by a woman who was 85 years old. She lived in this house most of her life, and a developer owned the property on either side of her. He wanted to buy the property so he could tear it down and put in a large mixed-use development. She said, "I'm not selling." He said, "Well, I'll give you $1 million." Her house is worth $150,000. Small house on a small lot. And the developer said, and that's the point at which the developer said, "I'll give you $1 million." He said, "I'm still not selling. My community is worth more to me than $1 million." She was a hero in her neighborhood, but the developer responded by building right around her house. And I think it's a symbol of how so many people are experiencing community these days, where they feel that decisions about the future of their neighborhood aren't being made by the people who live there, but by outside money, by outside powers. And how so many people, even where there's a fairly strong sense of community, there's so many individuals who feel disconnected, who feel isolated, who don't feel part of community life. To further depress you, I think our very democracy is in crisis. And some of it's a response to this sense of powerlessness. People feeling like, hey, I'm paying my taxes, why is the government being more responsive? As Michael said, I used to be a community organizer. This is one of the many demonstrations I organized against our local government. In Fremont, they were so angry, they simply erected a rocket on the side of one of their businesses, and they announced that it was aimed at City Hall. They declared themselves the Artist Republic of Fremont. These are probably extreme examples, but we see this happening absolutely all over the country, where people are starting to think of themselves not as citizens, but as taxpayers, where people are seeing government as the problem. Every form of government has ratepayers, has taxpayers, but only democracies have citizens. So how do we rebuild that? Fortunately, I think because of the economic crisis, because of the climate change, the crisis around climate change, people are starting to wake up, rediscover the value of community, and rediscover the importance of democracy. And in order for it to work right, it has to be a change in the part of both government and community, which is why I'm glad to see such a good cross-section of people here today. And to illustrate that, I've got a chart. I'll go over very quickly. But just to show that change needs to happen on both sides of the equation. So government shift is, we need to start recognizing that neighborhoods aren't just places with needs, but communities of people with incredible, underutilized resources. That's the real basis for partnership. Because then the community's bringing something to the table. The community's bringing nothing but needs. Government's got all the power. Community shift needs to move beyond blaming government to taking a share of the responsibility. Think of ourselves as citizens again. And recognizing there's some things communities do best. Government needs to move beyond customer service. Yes, it's important to have good customer service. And yes, it's important to have good citizen engagement, community engagement. But it's also important to have community empowerment. And here's the difference. Citizen engagement is about involving citizens in the government's priorities through the government's processes and procedures, task forces, commissions, where government still has all the power. And that's appropriate in many cases. But we need to move beyond that at times and also empower the community to work on their own priorities through their own associations. That's also appropriate. Communities need to start thinking and acting as citizens rather than as taxpayers. Government needs to follow the iron rule of community organizing, which is never do for people what they can do for themselves. And communities should never wait for government to do what could be better done by the community. Here's a big one. Every city I go to and I talk to elected officials about empowering the community, they look at me like I'm crazy. Why should we empower those activists? And when I listen to them, they're talking about the same 10 or 15 people. They're in every city in the world who have really big mouths and very small constituencies who say, I speak for this community, and nobody's behind them. There's probably nobody like that in Eugene, but we have a lot of them in Seattle. So government needs to stop focusing on the self-proclaimed leaders that are often reinforced by processes that have worn everybody else down, and to start focusing much more on leadership training and assistance with outreach and networking, and recognize that there are all kinds of, just about everybody in our community is already organized. And how do we reach out to all those different organizations in our community? Same way, the community needs to make it worth government's while to partner with the community by making it a priority to build broad and inclusive participation. Because this only works if it's about democracy, if it's about really being representative and accountable. If it's a few self-selected people, it isn't worth government's while to partner with the community. Past it that time. I have one more. I'm not going to go through all these. I've got way too much here. But I just wanted to highlight this next one, which is the community can't partner with the government divided by functions. So government needs to develop a more holistic, community-based approach. In the city of Seattle, we had 32 different departments trying to reach out to the community. Plus, we had our county government, and state government, and federal government, and port, and school district, and hundreds of nonprofit organizations, all trying to reach out and empower the community. They're being empowered to death. There aren't enough nights in the year to go to all those meetings. So how do we start getting government to be organized the way communities are organized, by neighborhood, rather than in discrete functions? Because you get much more holistic solutions, much more appropriate partnership. But the same way, government can't partner with the community that's divided by factions. So we need to work collaboratively within the neighborhood and with other neighborhoods so we can work out consensus at the local level. And that gives real power to the neighborhoods and allows the government to really partner with the community. I'm not going to go through all these here. So I was here about 5 years ago. Was anybody here when I spoke 5 years ago? Or you forgot? Okay. So I talked about our programs in the Department of Neighborhood, so I was just going to go through those very quickly because I'd like to move on to some other things. But we put a number of programs to try to move in this direction. We started up in 1988. We were way behind you guys. I think you were 15 years ahead of us. But we took some kind of different directions. So one thing we did was create a system of 13 little city halls where people can do business with government right in their own neighborhood rather than having to go downtown, where they can work across all the different silos of city government and get all their needs met in one place. And a system of district councils. I think that's somewhat similar to what you have here. We put together a program called Involving All Neighbors to help neighborhood associations and people with intellectual disabilities start to work together by focusing on the gifts of people with intellectual disabilities rather than just focusing on that label disabled. And that became a way to start thinking about how do we involve all the marginalized people in our community, and how do we create much stronger, more effective groups when we reach out and include absolutely everyone, including those people who've been labeled unemployed, homeless, single parents, at-risk youth, old people, non-English speaking. All those labels where we've labeled people not by their strengths, not by their gifts, but by what they're missing. Third, we created a program called the Neighborhood Matching Fund. And the idea of this was to meet the neighborhoods halfway in projects that were a priority for neighborhoods but hadn't been a priority for city government. We celebrated the 20th anniversary of this program last year, and over that time more than 4,000 community self-help projects have been completed. The city's $50 million investment over the years has leveraged $70 million in community resources. The end of the old model where people were looking to government to do everything never would have been tapped. But the best benefit is it's newly involved tens of thousands of people in community life because we've finally given people a way to get involved other than going to meetings. And believe it or not everybody will come out for a meeting on a beautiful Saturday morning. Another program we put in place, community groups said, this is fantastic, you've empowered us to do these projects, but if you really wanted to give us power, give us the power to plan. So if a neighborhood would bring all their key stakeholders together, all parties, not just one group, but all the different groups together, and have a plan for outreach to reach out to absolutely everybody in the community, particularly the marginalized people, we would give them money to hire their own planner who was accountable to the community. And through that program, we involved 30,000 people in the development of 38 bottom-up neighborhood plans. Very different kind of planning that was much more comprehensive because it came up with much more holistic solutions because the neighborhoods is where it all comes together. solutions that were really appropriate to the distinct character of each place. But what was really great was these plans didn't just sit on the shelf. Because people put so much work into it, they held our government accountable for implementation. But more importantly, they took a lot of responsibility for implementation themselves. Because they owned the plan. They recognized there's a lot communities could do the government can't do. And there's a lot we can do together. But I'd like to move on and talk about how the same approach is being utilized absolutely all over the world. So neighborhood matching fund programs now exist absolutely everywhere. In Japan, and in Australia, and in Ireland. I was just in Wodonga, Australia. They're known for their large water tower here. They gave me a t-shirt saying the 6 great towers of the world. Had the Eiffel Tower and also had the Wodonga water tower. But in Wodonga, they started up their own neighborhood, they call it the Neighborhood Power Program. They have a matching fund program. And they showed me this project. This is a church in their community. And there were some older women who were looking for some way to contribute to the community. And they contacted the church and they said, could we develop some of your lawn as a community garden? Then they're trying to figure out how to build the raised beds. And they contacted the local men's shed. It's a great program they have all over Australia where retired men come together in a men's shed and do woodworking together and make items for the benefit of the community. So the men, and it's also a great way for them to watch after each other and get a little time away from their wives. So the men created all these raised beds. What I loved about this project was people from all walks of life got involved. So you can see here, young people helped with filling it up with dirt and doing the planting. The new immigrants and refugees got involved in this project. People with disabilities are very active in this project. And then they found there was this old commercial kitchen in the church. So they asked, could we utilize that kitchen? And it brought, again, the whole community together to help start processing this food. And they worked with the nutritionists, and they made incredible gourmet meals. And again, everybody got involved. Older people, high school students, local organization of people with intellectual disabilities is incredibly active in this program. And they packaged it, and they freeze these gourmet meals, and they serve thousands and thousands of gourmet meals to people who have absolutely no food at all. And they do it through community. It's in Taiwan. In Taiwan, they have community empowerment centers all over the country, in every major city, where they're training people how to be, first of all, they serve kind of like our little city halls to help put one-stop shopping for government. But also they do lots of training out of here. I was privileged to be able to speak at the graduation ceremony for the young community planners. These are young people who stepped up and said, we want to be leaders in our community, volunteer leaders. And all these young people are taking on their own projects. So they took me to the village of To Go. And at To Go, they showed me these projects that have been built by young people. Where at To Go, the village, they had no park, they had no bumping place, no place for the community to come together. So they built little parks in everybody's front yards. And people come over at night and they eat together, they drink together, they play games together and build a strong sense of community. But this and so many other projects are being led by these young community planners, volunteers who care deeply about their community. This is in Golden Plains, Australia. This is a rural part of Victoria. And there are 23 communities here who are amalgamated by their state government into one community. Very rural, so although there's 23 communities, there's a population of only 16,000 people, spread over a huge area. The farmers were picketing City Hall because they weren't getting the kind of services they wanted. And City Hall said, we don't have any resources, so we're going to do bottom-up planning. We're going to do bottom-up planning because we don't have money. So many cities use that as an excuse not to engage the community. They said, we've got to do it because we don't have money. So they turned it over to the community, and the community members themselves developed 23 bottom-up plans. 1/4, 4,000 of the 16,000 people in that community got engaged in the planning process. 25% of the people. They came up with 600 recommendations. 96% of them have been implemented. They were implemented by the citizens themselves because they owned it, because it was their ideas. Democracy works. And now this village of Golden Plains has the highest approval rating of any local municipality in the state of Victoria. This is in Porto Alegre, Brazil, where they started participatory budgeting quite a few years ago. They involve over 100,000 people in the development of the city's budget. And they have accountability sessions at the neighborhood level to hold government accountable to make sure that those priorities are being implemented. This is a model that now that's been picked up by cities all over Brazil. There's more than 80 cities that have participatory budget programs. Same kind of process is being replicated now in many places in the United States, in Canada, and all over the United Kingdom. In India, they've created village assemblies in every village where it's kind of like our old-fashioned town meetings where everybody comes together to help make the decisions for the community. And in the United Kingdom, they put together a program out of the coalition government called Big Society. I had the privilege of speaking there at 10 Downing Street on the 4th of July. My brother gave me a special tie for the occasion. It was a tie that had all the signatures to the Declaration of Independence. But I talked to them about our programs in Seattle, and now they're replicating. They have a neighborhood matching fund that they're doing nationwide. 120 million pounds that they're putting into bottom-up neighborhood projects because they don't have money. They want to multiply with the community's resources. And most amazingly, they are training 5,000 community organizers. I say Barack Obama could never get away with that, but here the Tories are in the UK. And it's following the model of London Citizens. Here's one of the meetings of London Citizens. Just an incredible grassroots community organization out of the Olinsky School of Community Organizing that's been working very effectively for a living wage job campaign, and have now got a lot of local retail, hospitals, even the Olympics have agreed to pay everybody living wage jobs. And they're also creating a system of safe houses. Because you've read about the violence, the riots going on in the UK. Some of those neighborhoods are have been incredibly unsafe for years. And so they've created a system of safe houses and safe businesses to help protect their children in the community. So finally, how do we know if all this, what's our measure? How do we know if all this is being successful? I think it's the hardest thing for all of us to come up with a good measure for successful community development work. Because if we're doing it right, it cuts across all kinds of indicators. And what do we take credit for? But it's so important because at this time where we have huge budget cuts, so many governments are seeing neighborhood work as kind of, it's kind of fluffy. It's kind of a nice thing in good times, but when times get tough, we got to get back to basics. And the basics are about paving the roads, and it's about the police force, which are important. But isn't our democracy also a basic? Shouldn't we be as concerned about our democratic foundations as we are about our physical infrastructure? And think about all the resources we've leveraged when we bring the community in as true partners. So I'm a little bit cynical about measures. I grew up in Iowa, so I love this quote, this old Iowa farm proverb. You don't make the hog fatter by weighing it. I think oftentimes we spend way too many resources trying to track how well we're doing, and we don't spend enough money on the services themselves. Or I love this quote from Einstein. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So I've discovered the perfect measure. I was at Port Phillip, Australia, and they said, you know, the only thing that really matters, it's not rocket science, is whether people are happy or not. Think about it. What's more important? So they trained people how to be smile spies. And people walk down the streets and they catch other people's eyes and they see what percentage of people smile back at them. And then they have a formula they work out. They calculate how many smiles per hour there are in each neighborhood. And it's the only measure I've seen that's actually changing conditions, because no neighborhood wants to be seen as unfriendly. So the numbers just keep going up. These guys are at 7 smiles per hour. These guys are up to 10. And this guy is really happy because he's got 14 smiles per hour. So I just like to conclude by thanking you for the incredible work you do in your communities. I know it's really tough work, really hard work. Sometimes, you know, it's hard to see progress. Sometimes it's just really frustrating where I think, God, I'm working so hard to just get a safe intersection of my block. And meanwhile, we've got these huge issues with world peace, with climate change, with economic collapse. And what difference am I making? And that's why I wanted to share stories, because I've had the privilege of seeing the same kind of action absolutely everywhere in the world. Small villages in India, and in Taiwan, and in Beijing. I saw in Saigon, in Shanghai, neighbors who took over the park when the government wanted to come in and build a large high-rise there. This kind of activism is happening absolutely everywhere, and it's what gives me hope. We're part of a global movement, and you guys are on the cutting edge. You celebrate, what, 38 years? It's incredible. So I just want to encourage you to keep on going. I hope some of you come to the workshop this afternoon, because we're going to talk more about how do we really build that broad, inclusive engagement, because that's the only way we're going to get there. It's the only way we're going to make the partnership work. It's the only way we're going to get government to take us really seriously, and it's the only way we're going to make real change. So thanks so much. Have a great summit today. Look forward to meeting so many of you over the course of the day. Thanks so much.